Okay, so we'll get started. Hello, my name is Stephanie Hagstrom, and I'm the Director of Community Development at the Research Data Alliance US, and the host of today's webinar titled Professionalizing Data Stewardship, Global Updates to Inform RDA Community on Future Directions. Before we get started with the presentation today, I have a bit of information to share with you about RDA and to go over some general information, and then I'll turn it over to Christina to get things started. The Research Data Alliance is a community of over 12,500 data experts from 147 countries who collaborate and build social and technical bridges to enable open sharing and the reuse of data. Members of the RDA come together through self-formed focus working groups, exploratory interest groups, and communities of practice groups to exchange knowledge and discoveries, discuss barriers and potential solutions, define policies, and to test standards. Many of the 86 active groups have produced outputs to enhance and facilitate global sharing and reuse. The RDA also has 30 national groups that support initiatives of the RDA members in those regions by providing a platform to interact on a global level. Those national groups may be individual countries or a group of countries. As an example, there is a region of the Americas that includes all countries within North America and Latin America. There are also 4 contributing regions: France, Australia, the EU, and the United States, who each provide the resources to support and sustain the RDA global operations. The RDA is one of those recognized regions with RDA US is one of the recognized regions with over 2,600 RDA members. In addition to providing resources to sustain the global operations, the RDA US also supports the RDA global community by hosting and coordinating community activities, such as the webinar today and the series, this whole working groups and interest group series. We also feature podcast series and host those with interviews and discussions with group co-chairs of newly endorsed RDA groups. And starting on July 12th, we will be organizing and hosting a series in Latin America as a way to introduce the RDA community there. I will have more information on these series at the end of this webinar, and you may also find a list of these events on RDA US webpage, rd-alliance.org/groups/RDA US. Over to my slides. In addition to the 4 contributing regions, there are also 58 organizational members who also contribute resources to the RDA global operations, and 12 affiliate members that support the RDA in a variety of ways. So today we are going to have live interpretation. We have French and Spanish, which is very exciting, and I'm really happy that the interpreters are here. If you wish to listen to the translation of this webinar, you select the globe on the bottom of your Zoom control screen. And we will also be recording today in English, French, and Spanish. And we will add a link to the recordings on the RDA website following the webinar. We have allotted time throughout the webinar and at the end of the webinar for questions and discussions. You may use the Q&A chat or use the raised hand method to ask questions. If there are more questions than available time to answer, we will transfer unanswered questions to a document and we will send those to you. So here we go. Today's webinar is presented by the members of the RDA Professionalizing Data Stewardship Interest Group. And I'll go ahead and introduce the speakers and then we'll get going. So Christina Drummond, our first presenter today, is the Executive Director for a global community governed effort called the Open Access Book Usage Data Trust, also known as OABU. And Christina, if I got that wrong, you can correct me later. Which is working to foster the community governed sharing of quality, interoperable, open access book usage data. Our second presenter today is Lisa Lazalou, Lisa is a research support officer in the Research Support Office of URAC Research in Italy, where she coordinates and supports research data management strategies and policies. Oh, ask him to mute. The third presenter is Jukka Rantasari. Jukka is a head of library services at the University of Turku Library in Finland. The fourth presenter is Jan Wang. Jan is the coordinator of data stewardship at the Delft University of Technology in the Netherlands. The fifth presenter is Graham Parton. Graham is a senior environmental scientist at the Center for Environmental Data Analysis in the United Kingdom. So here we go. Thanks for presenting today, all of you. We're pleased to have you here. And I'll now stop sharing my screen, Christina, and you can take over from here. I will get to that. Okay.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this opportunity to talk about our interest group's history and objectives. Let me get set up here. Sorry about that. So forming out of Birds of a Feather sessions in 2019, our interest group was chartered in 2020 to facilitate information sharing across efforts both within the RDA and among external initiatives, such as the Data Steward curriculum training efforts occurring under the European Open Science Cloud umbrella. Our interest group is open to all, and we invite those of you working in this space to join us. In addition to report outs at plenaries, we have an active Slack community and regular calls organized by teams looking to advance projects. You can participate in our Slack workspace, follow us on our RDA webpage, or look for our affiliated outputs on our Zenodo community. And you'll see some links dropped into chat here as we kind of go through this to those efforts so you can join. The motivation behind our interest group is grounded in this belief that fair data requires more than technical data management and curation. Governance, ethics, and sustainability dimensions need to be factored in to ensure responsible planning, processing, storage, and reuse of data at all stages of the research lifecycle. These elements are included within our data stewardship definition that focuses on responsible planning and implementation to optimize data use, reuse, and reproducibility before, during, and after a research project. This interest group has had a heavy European influence since its inception. The definition of data stewardship used in our 2020 charter and shown on this slide came from the Dutch Telecenter for Life. Plenary conversations have continued to show an international interest in understanding how data stewardship complements data management to advance fair data. One of the biggest challenges is one of the terminology, as the role or title of data steward isn't universal. In the US context, for example, we have chief data officers and chief data innovation officers, along with the department or program level staff responsible for data governance, all of whom could be acting to steward collections of research data. Once we recognize data stewardship as a vital element of providing fair data and stewarding that data, opportunities surface for international collaboration, such as mapping career pathways or developing a body of knowledge for data stewards to inform the development of interoperable training resources. Our interest group has focused on the need to professionalize, quote unquote, data stewardship by exploring common needs and terms, as there is currently a lack of global consensus around, on one hand, the responsibilities, roles, and value of a data steward, and on the other, the knowledge and skills a data steward should possess. This interest group is facilitated by an international group of 8 co-chairs who represent multiple disciplines and perspectives. I won't read this slide to you, but welcome you to follow up with any of us after this webinar via Slack or by contacting us through our RDA webpage. In the 3 years since we were chartered, there has been a lot of conversation about needs and priorities. A roadmap of interrelated needs was developed, and task teams of committed volunteers self-organized to understand and document, for the first thing, institutional business case for data stewardship, 2, terminology in use for data stewardship, 3, institutional models of data stewardship implementation, and 4, training requirements. To date, these teams have worked independently as the interest group co-chairs facilitate knowledge sharing across groups. In today's session, you will hear updates from these groups as they consider advancing to working groups and as this interest group considers what's next. In addition to report outs from task teams and a brief update on what was covered this month at our RDA plenary just a few weeks ago, we hope to hear your thoughts on our future directions and collaborations. To that end, we ask you to please note your questions in our Zoom Q&A feature throughout this session. And if you have ideas on future areas of work or potential collaborators that we should be engaging, we ask that you add them to our virtual whiteboard at any point during our session, using a link that's going to be dropped into our Zoom chat here shortly. We're using a website called Group Map, and so you'll see that link and you can go and just drop your ideas in there. With that, I'm going to pass the microphone and screen share to Lise to talk about the environmental scan of data stewardship models.
Thank you, Christina. Let me quickly share my slides. There we go. So my job today is to briefly introduce our models group and the models of data stewardship survey that our group completed in fall 2021. The purpose of the survey was to engage with the global research data management community and to understand better the approaches that organizations are taking to data stewardship. When designing the survey, we drew on various existing definitions of data stewardship, examined some use cases we were familiar with, and also worked with the business model canvas that the Digital Curation Center in the UK has adapted for research data management context. Based on this work, we arrived at a generic conceptual model that we thought expresses the key variables we expected to see in different organizational approaches to data stewardship services. And you see our conceptual model here on this slide. The service at the center, data stewardship service, is the central aspect of this conceptual model. In the concept, we considered that data stewards undertake a range of roles to enable a service and to perform one or more functions, and also to meet the needs of internal and external stakeholders. We assume that data stewardship services follow certain standards and meet the demands of certain drivers. The service may exist in relation to other contexts, such as other services, networks, and so on. This conceptual model became the basis for our global survey about data stewardship services. And the survey we developed mapped onto our conceptual model. So in the first section of the survey, we asked respondents basic information about their service, for example, their geographic location, the domain specificity of their service, and also the organizational level of their service. In other words, whether the respondent's service was departmental service, institutional service, national service, or a global service. In section 2 of the survey, we focused on data stewardship roles, functions, users, and resources in the respondent's particular context. The aim was to capture the working parts of the service to identify models of operation. And in section 3, we examined the wider context to respondents' services. We also asked respondents questions about the service maturity, their service experience level, as well as tips and tricks in terms of what has worked for them and what hasn't. We ran the survey in Qualtrics in fall 2021. The survey was open for, I think if I remember correctly, about 2.5 months. And we have spent spring 22 cleaning the data and performing initial analysis. Our data set, as well as the survey questionnaire, have been published in Zenodo. So we invite you to go take a look and download it already. And we are close to finalizing our initial report, so our initial analysis of the data. In total, we received 136 responses that we were able to retain for analysis. of those 136 responses, 82 were complete responses. The responses included two identifiable cohorts. So we got responses on one hand from institutional data stewardship services, and on the other hand, the second cohort was a national level up, so national, multinational, or global services. Our data has a strong European bias, and within Europe, a strong UK and Dutch bias. We reckon that the communication around the survey, as well as the survey itself, may have used Eurocentric terms and language around data stewardship, which may have been one of the causes for this geographic bias in the response. And as we now think of the possible next steps, one of those is in fact targeted follow-up surveys that address specific communities in beyond Europe. So to address our bias in our data. We also have considered follow-up interviews with some of the respondents, and in the survey we asked respondents to indicate their willingness to participate in such interviews, and quite a few of them did, so there's potential to do those follow-up interviews. And finally, obviously, we continue our analysis, and we want those results, we hope that those results fit into the work of other task groups within the interest group, but also to the work of other interest groups in RDA and organizations interested in working with data stewardship related issues beyond the RDA. So thank you, that's it from me.
Thank you, Lisa. Next, I will shortly present you the outcome of the training task group 5. I will soon show you the present draft version of the report that we have made. I will present the research questions, the take-home messages, the main outcomes, and what kind of feedback we would like to have from you after the presentation. Our research method was a literature review. We started our project by searching research papers, reports, white papers, and working papers in Web of Science, Scopus, in several EBSCO databases, and in Google Scholar. We found over 270 sources, of which we finally chose and used about 100 sources in our report to answer to our research questions. The working title of the report is Gaps in Data Stewardship. What kind of needs for training do data stewards face in supporting research? I will now click this cover of our draft report, which is a link to our reports. So in the left hand side, we can see the navigation. But let's first introduce ourselves or the contents of the report. The report contains an executive summary, introduction with research questions and definitions, methods, results, and discussion about different kinds of gaps, plus recommendations to meet these gaps. In the section 4, we have collected and categorized the gaps and the solutions with the sources to find more information. We also have some limitations, after which we state the conclusions and next steps, list references, and in appendices we have collected and concisely described further information sources. Let me first introduce our research questions in the section 1.1 on page 8. The overarching research problem is what kind of needs for training do data stewards face in supporting research? And the more specific research questions are, what kind of skills gaps do data stewards have? What kind of skills gaps do researchers have? What kind of gaps are in existing training materials? What kind of gaps are in our knowledge of data stewards and researchers' needs? And finally, what kind of solutions to the aforementioned gaps are identified in the literature? Besides, in the results section, the main outcomes of the report can be found in the section 4, containing an overview of the gaps and solutions discussed in the report. So let's go there. Here we can see the categorization of the gaps and the recommendations for solutions. And first we have here general level gaps with reference materials in the middle section, and solutions described in the references. Next we have gaps in implementing FAIR data, again with references or sources and solutions recommended. Then we will have gaps in training materials, again the gaps, the references and the recommended solutions. And next, gaps in data stewards skills, after which come gaps in researcher skills, gaps in our knowledge, and finally, the governance of data stewardship in research organizations.
1 minute left, Jukka.
Thank you. On the final slide, we have 3 take-home messages. First, enable researchers to share their data from the beginning of their project. This means motivating and teaching researchers to begin to plan and document the data lifecycle as early as possible. Training and guides should address the ethical viewpoints of data sharing as well as societal and practical benefits with technical instructions. Second recommendation, collaborate internationally on certified training. That's because the greatest gap concerning training materials results from a lack of infrastructure that enables sharing and communicating of knowledge and best practices to the wider community. Third, address the increased need for technical skills in data stewardship, because future data steward competencies border on and partly overlap with computer science technical competencies. So the data steward community needs increased collaboration with computer scientists to define and build solutions to future data stewardship. And it's becoming more and more automated. Yeah, and finally, we will ask you to send feedback to us if you have any ideas how and where to use this report besides in this group. Thank you.
Thanks all the previous presenters. I'm happy to also share a more recent initiative from the career tracks group. So data stewards and also similar roles in the research data management support roles, they are new positions in academic system, and they haven't been recognized as a profession in academia and in academic organizations. So this is very uncertain career path for people who would like to become data stewards or related RDM support roles. And for organizations, this is also a challenge to keep such a professional expertise to make the pool of expertise sustainable. So these are all challenges when we talk about career tracks for data steward and data stewardship. So our group, we are launching a community call for consultation on this topic. We would really like to invite people who currently as a data steward or similar roles, or have worked in such positions to join a survey to provide anonymous input on the current and future perspective about the career in working as a such profession. We are also looking for volunteers who would like to provide more insightful input regarding their career perspectives, also via the survey. So we would like to, the expected outcomes include, we would like to reach out to people who are data stewards or similar roles, and across different organizations and across different regions to really reach out to the community members, and also to have an initial overview on the career perspectives from the community. This will not be the solution to really propose a clear track for the career, but that's the starting point to better understand the current situation. So the survey we just launched during the RDA plenary last week will be valid and open and welcome participation for 4 months and will end on 20th of October. And here's the link. Please feel free to participate and feel free to share within your network with related groups and individuals. And we hope to have a multiple input across different continents and different types of organizations to have a good overview on the subject as a starting point. So thank you. I will also give the floor now to Graham on the business case.
Hello. So one of our other task groups was the business case for data stewardship. And there we go. So the challenge that was sort of set out for this task group was that organizations do rely on using data for research and analysis, but there's often, they're not aware of the need for somebody or a service to actually kind of have stewardship roles within that organization and to bring that sort of expertise to the table. The methodology for kind of the business case task group was being to sort of explore a series of sort of case studies to understand what the benefits are to stakeholders, and also to understand the risks to help to formulate a good sort of business case that people can take to their own host organizations to forward their case for improved data stewardship. Expected output for this task group has been a short report with case studies and stakeholder mapping exercise. And there has been sort of worked on, and there is a draft version of this report now available, but it does need a little bit more input from the community to help to finalize that report itself. The report has an outline of what a data steward is and the context of data stewardship and the roles around those, but also what have been the sort of recent developments around the whole area of professionalizing data stewardship. Also, it makes a case of it's not just about the technology, about putting a service in place, but it's also equally about the people as well. And as part of the case as well is expressing the risks to the organization and to the data themselves in the absence of any data stewardship. So, like I said earlier on, it covers, what does a data steward do, or what does a data stewardship service do? Who are the stakeholders as well? And to explore that, the task group have sort of run a workshop in the past looking at particular cases, and those are written up in the report as well. The next steps for the group are to sort of, like I said, to bring that draft report to completion and to link up with the outputs of the other task groups which are in operation. One task group you haven't heard about today is about our terminology task groups, which are the definitions and the sort of common language we can use around data stewardship and how the terminology is there within the wider community. You've already heard about the data stewardship model survey and the output we can draw from there into this business case report. It obviously has a clear link with the job profiles and the career paths in task groups as well. There are sort of questions about how we can possibly bring all of these together in the future of our interest group to create a formal RDA working group, but that's a question that can be explored by the community. But crucially, we do need some more people to actually kind of come along and to help us to push this over the line now. Now, I'm going to move on from just talking about the business case task group, but going back to our recent RDA 19th plenary, where we had a wider discussion within the whole community that was able to attend. And as part of that, we held some breakout sessions, which we explored 4 main sort of questions. So what were the RDA outputs that would be useful given the current state of play for our interest group and professionalizing data stewardship as a whole? What collaboration opportunities exist? So for example, we have had some great connections with EOSC task force over in Europe. We would also like to hear, what people would think is achievable over the next 18 months, as we have already matured some of our outputs and we continue to mature some, but what can we actually also do in the next 18 months? But also asking, who else could sort of contribute the time to sort of lead efforts over the next 18 months as well. The highlights and the feedback that we got from the breakout groups with it, I've just got on the screen there. So the main one was that the interest group really remains relevant, that there are new communities coming to us all the time and saying that they're in an infancy of establishing data stewardship as a practice within their organization, and they need to draw on the wider community to help support their cases. There was also a request that although we've been producing some great outputs already, there's a need for us to bring all those strands together and to facilitate the discovery of them as well. And as the outputs do mature, there's a question about kind of the level of authority that is in our outputs to make sure that these are clear to the wider community. And so we're going to make sure that we are tied in with the official RDA process for producing outputs as well, which obviously will involve some sort of level of community review. There was also a question about kind of research software engineers on the technological side, which also needs an emphasis, and whether research technology professionals could work as a broader term to help to encompass data stewards and to help to draw more people into our conversation as well. So that's like the conversation that took place at the RDA plenary, and I'm just going to hand over now to Christina to take us on to what's next.
Thanks, Graham. So as we mentioned at the beginning of this session, we wanted to ask this audience to get your thoughts on potential future directions and projects for this interest group around data stewardship. Similarly, we wanted your thoughts on collaborators or other efforts that we should be engaging, both in the work that you've already heard about, but also some of these future directions. So what we would like to do now is open the floor for some virtual brainstorming. And if you can use the link in the chat to add, or this link you see here on the screen, this will take you to our virtual whiteboard. And after a few minutes of ideation, we'll then transition to question and answer. I am going to share my screen here in a moment to share the virtual whiteboard. Just note, if you have questions, put them in the Zoom Q&A window. We'll come back to those there. The way you can use this virtual whiteboard, what you're going to do is if you want to add a potential RDA output that you'd like to see emerge, go to the board and basically next to the plus sign, start typing your idea and then hit your return or enter key on your keyboard, which will save it to the board. Similarly for collaborators, if you have some in mind, please list them in that column on the right. Finally, I'll also note while we're doing this, if you'd like to receive an invitation to our Slack group or help with a specific project, you're welcome to add your information to that last column. Or if you don't want that publicly broadcast in a webinar, I would just recommend that you reach out to us through the email on our RDA PDF, the Professionalizing Data Stewardship Interest Group webpage. So with that, let me switch over the board and see what folks have added so far. We don't have anything added. Oh, there we go. It's starting. So as a reminder, if you click the URL on your browser, you'll be able to add ideas for what you would like to see come out of the RDA to help professionalize data stewardship. So I'm going to be quiet here. We're going to take 60 seconds for folks to add their ideas to this board. Again, if there are potential outputs, please list them in the column on the left. And if you have other efforts that you know of that are working in this space, that are perhaps publishing reports or doing surveys to help further this professionalization of data steward profession, please go ahead and note those in the column on the right. Thank you, everyone, for adding your thoughts. Go ahead and do this for about 30 more seconds, but know that this board will stay open. And I'll invite my fellow panelists, if there is anything that you would like to comment on or note as these ideas are coming in, feel free to do so. Thank you, everyone. I see there are some notes here about tools to support data stewardship. I'll ask the community, I don't know who put that in particular, but if you had specific software or tools in mind, one of the things you can do on this whiteboard is double click an idea and add those details. And so for folks on this call who may be data stewards, if there are specific things that you find you need, please go ahead and double click that comment and feel free to add those notes. And you're welcome to do this on any of the things you see here on this board. This is wonderful brainstorming. Thank you, everyone. Crowdsourcing what to do next is always very helpful. So we'll leave this ideation board up for the duration of this webinar, but we did want to transition to question and answers as well. So at this time, I would like to invite folks to go ahead and drop any questions they have into our Q&A. You'll see the Q&A button next to the chat button on your Zoom webinar. And I'm going to go ahead and with Stephanie, we're going to facilitate these with our panel. I'll invite my fellow panelists if you want to come back onto video for this. Doesn't look like we have any questions so far, but lots of great ideation.
There's lots of excellent material on the board, and some of them, at least from the models initial report, will also engage with some of those comments and ideas.
And I'm peeking into the chat. I noticed that Stefan had asked a question about whether we were looking for suggestions of outputs for any group of the RDA or this interest group specifically. And I think what we were looking for was this interest group. So any outputs that you would like to see with respect to professionalizing data stewardship. Because this interest group is at a bit of a turning point where we have a lot of these efforts that are wrapping up and transitioning. Some are just starting, but truly we have this question of where do we go next? And so this is where I think having your thoughts is really helpful as a community. We do have one question that came in. Is there a maturity level of data steward defined? Would anyone like to answer that?
So it was one of our areas that we explored inside the model survey was to try and explore the maturity level of the services that have been covered by responses. It did actually lead to a nice little conversation that I've had with a few people within the models task group about how services do go through like an evolutional life cycle, as it were. You may get a service which starts off in its infancy. It might be one or two people who somehow put it together a service and they get a little bit of seed funding for it and it suddenly grows as it becomes successful. But then how that service then matures and becomes more established as well is an interesting area, because that can lead to maybe some sort of sustainable income to make sure the service will continue to be there and will remain. But as it becomes more and more successful, there may be a need to change your staffing model as well. And we could certainly cite a couple of examples of that one. But with regards to kind of definitions of those stages, that's not been defined, but it's certainly, I think, an area that could be explored.
I find that's a very nice question, because with my colleagues as a data steward, we recently started to discuss also labeled ourselves being mature after a few years in service in this role. But that's really depends on what type of model, like Graham mentioned, what type of model you have in the organization for data stewardship. And then you can assess the maturity level of data stewards, how well they do the role. And I don't think there is a standard maturity label can apply to all different situations. But this is a very interesting question, actually, to further discuss together.
Okay, so let me kind of continue. Speaking of models, Naeem has a question. Is there any known data stewardship model, working model, in an academic institute setting that you've come across?
I think there's from the members of the models group, for example, we've got lots of experiences of our own instances of our own services, which hopefully work well. I think there are some really nice examples coming out of places like the Netherlands, for example, which are sort of really well documented.
We have Merck Fox with his hand raised, and I'll unmute. Go ahead, Merck. You unraised your hand. Okay, maybe he didn't have any questions.
I could add a little bit more to the previous question about the data stewardship model institutional setting. So in the Netherlands, there are a few different types of models at institutions. In general, when we talk about the data stewards, because data stewardship is more than the staff, but when we just talking about staff, the data stewards, there are two typical type of models at institutional setting. One is you have a centralized pool of expertise of data stewards, and that's mainly from like library support. And those data steward or data managers can be assigned to different faculties or project level work. There are also decentralized models, so you can have faculty-based data steward. So the data steward is responsible for all the whole faculty regarding the RDM support as the focal point. And these two typical models work very well in different institutions, and that's really based on the culture of the institution, the history of how things set up, and the related programs, organizational structure. So there are a few reports about the Dutch data stewardship. I will add the link in the chat in a minute.
Hi, can I speak?
Go for it, Mark.
Sorry, I think I got kicked off for a moment there. Okay, so I just wanted to jump in about the area of maturity or level of maturity by adding context about what I've been doing, because I've been looking at this from the other side and working in an advisory kind of role with some of the institutions in the United States that are just starting to spin up their data science PhD programs. And some of you will know, if you're into pedagogy and kind of that sort of area of the accreditation and the university policies at this higher level, there are problems with certain kinds of technical disciplines getting accreditation for a PhD. And it's got to do with, you know, the role of theory and sort of theoretical knowledge in these disciplines. But the point for us is that data stewardship actually provides a track within PhD data science training that legitimizes that and can facilitate, you know, accreditation so that we can start getting, you know, data science PhDs in the United States. Now, in particular, I put this in the chat, but the things that can, in our current environment, make a convincing case for not just accreditation, but also for the sponsors to start properly supporting data stewardship and data management when they fund research, just as a part of the overhead that they start taking right off the top, which is something that that I advocate, is that the data stewards have to be multidisciplinary in by nature, and that they should be actually in executive level positions within the institution, so that it's far beyond just data management, data curation, information systems knowledge. You know, those roles are fairly well defined in the academy and elsewhere. But what we don't have are C-suite people who can understand you know, strategic planning, contracts, and then especially policies at the national and international levels, where funding is going, what you know, funding, or I should say just research priorities in general are, because those align with the economy. They're very political. It's an entirely different kind of role for a technical expert, but we need desperately to have technical experts at that position. And I won't waste time, but I can absolutely guarantee you, and I could start listing if you wanted, all of the events that I've attended just in the last month where people are talking at the highest levels about how to manage data assets, AI, how to plan for, you know, these big investments that everybody is kind of pouring money into, and there are literally maybe, well, certainly less than 1% of the people in those rooms, whether they are panelists, certainly, but mostly even just the in the audience, less than 1% are computer scientists, data scientists, have any technical training at all. And so I'm coming at this from an entirely different side of it. I think you're all talking about the community of practice, and obviously that needs to be sorted out. But I just wanted to kind of add some different kind of context, and also let you know that I work on this issue. I'm looking for funding to get support for this issue. I can tell you that the National Science Foundation loves it when I talk about this, but it is still hard to get money from them, because it's always hard to get money in that interstitial space about policy guidance, which ultimately this is. But I work on that. I'll put that in the notes on the whiteboard. And I just wanted to add that perspective. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. And I would encourage you to join us on Slack. I think that, you know, this is a great example of where we have yet another opportunity to build on that institutional business case, not just for data stewardship, but to make the case for why this needs to be a C-suite position and to be broader than just data management. So thank you for that comment. We do have a couple more questions here in the Q&A, and I will ask one of my fellow panelists if they can share that Slack link again so folks can jump on in. I should note with Slack, it's a very active community, and a lot of our work does happen in Slack channels specific to all of these issue areas and topics we've been discussing today. So please jump in and engage as much as you're interested in. So one question we had that came up comes back to this, the terminology around data steward and the survey. And the question is, what European-centricness did you suspect arose in the survey? Data steward, quote unquote, at least seems similarly understood in at least North America and Europe. So I don't know if one of you want to respond from the survey perspective.
Yeah, I can start, and perhaps Graham wants to add something. But I think in a lot of our discussions, and also in how we worded the survey and how we worded the introduction to the survey, we focused perhaps a lot on advisory type of data stewardship roles, and used our understanding of data stewardship based on a model that comes from the Netherlands and Denmark. And it seems that there might be some differences in how data stewardship is understood beyond this particular Northern European context. And already I see a different question where Amy offers a lot of other roles and titles that also actually came up in the survey, and we see that data stewardship roles in plural are very broad, and there are many different titles that are around, and I think we struggled a bit in communicating that and ensuring that we got a response from all those people who currently do not have the title of data steward, or whose service does not have the title of data stewardship service, but who nonetheless provide a broad range of data stewardship services. So this, I think, was a struggle that might have led to some biases in the survey data. I don't know, Graham, if you want to add to this.
So I think the term data steward, data stewardship is great for those people who are already inside the conversation, as it were, because it provides a level playing ground, a common terminology of which we understand how to orientate around that conversation. What we seem to find, certainly from the feedback that we get from members of the wider community, is that those terms don't always translate into those local contexts. And some of that is, as Lise points out, it's about people not recognizing that the work that they're doing is data stewardship, and therefore they will not naturally gravitate towards the terminology we were using in the survey. So I think there are questions about how we can provide additional terminology or channels to which people can, from different communities can come and be part of that conversation, and to sort of help them to orientate within the conversation. I think that's definitely part of it. How it relates to kind of the Eurocentricness, part of it might also be because a lot of the people involved with the models survey and the contacts list that we had, we're obviously within European contexts. So for us to try and reach out within our own networks to go beyond those barriers was quite hard. So I think that might sort of be playing a little bit into what we're seeing.
It sounds like there's also an opportunity there if individuals on this call have networks that where they would be interested in reissuing the survey or broadening that. That's something that's definitely an opportunity out there. I'll note that, as you were talking about the different models, one of the questions that came in from Kelvin was if there was a specific conceptual model that's working as a standard for the management and study of data. And what I'm hearing with respect to data stewardship is that, there are many different things out there that can relate to data stewardship, but there is no one recognized standard or model right now that we're all kind of speaking around and referencing. Is that, I would say, I don't know if other panelists want to comment on that as well. And I'll just loop in the other question, which one of the attendees noted that data stewards appear to be enablers of data meshes as well. And so, as we think about all these different roles and possible ways people can act as a data steward, there is this question of how do we start unifying that into a common model or framework. Do any panelists have any other final thoughts on this? I think we have about 2 more minutes before we have to hand the mic back over. Well, hearing none, I think we'll invite Stephanie back.
Thank you. Let's see, let me get my slides sharing again.
If I may just quickly throw in a quick comment. So in the slides which we had from the models group, you saw there was the conceptual model there, and that was kind of born out of lots of conversations that we had. It went on for a number of months, I would say, different members of the group, and between us we've got quite a broad range of different services that we interact with, and so hopefully that range of different services is sort of reflected there.
Okay, well, I want to thank all of you, Christina, Yen, Graham, Lisa, Juka, for being here today, and the Professionalizing Data Stewardship Interest Group members who have contributed to this group's work. As they said, they would love for anyone on this call to join. They've given you lots of opportunities in the chat, so please do join and help them. I do also want to take some time to thank others that are behind the scenes that you see their names, but you not their faces. I want to thank Megan and Rebecca for providing technical support and support to the interpreters. The Digital Research Alliance in Canada for arranging the French interpreter services. And thanks to our wonderful French interpreter, Yanitza Carnano, and she's been with us now for a few of these. And thanks to Federico Cetrangelo and Andrea Morocampo, who's on this call, of La Referencia for arranging the Spanish interpreter services. And thanks to our Spanish interpreter, Roxana Gutierrez. So as I mentioned earlier, there will be webinar recordings and slide decks up on the website shortly. And I want to go through a few of the other things that are happening and coming up soon. In case you're interested in these topics. In this particular series, we're going to have the Cure Fair Working Group presenting in September. The Research Metadata Schemas Working Group will be presenting in October. And the DMP Common Standards Working Group, Data Management Plan Common Standards Working Group will be presenting in November. We also have a new thing, which I'm really excited about, and it's our Rda Podcast Series. So for those of you who like to listen instead of watch, we recently launched the Rda Data Streams Podcast Series, and it features interviews with Rda working group chairs, mainly the newly endorsed groups. So if you want to get interested in seeing what new groups are coming on board and where you might want to help, you can access the podcast through the Rda website or visit Podbean platform, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, and subscribe to Rda Data Streams. We have 2 published already, the Data Citation Working Group, which is one of our longest working groups, and that's a really nice listen to hear how they've been working for the last 10 years. And we have our second one, which is the data repository attributes, up on those platforms. And we have 3 more coming July, August, and September as listed. So please subscribe to those. We also have a new webinar series, and we'd love for you to help promote this. This is specifically for people in Latin America. So if you have colleagues down there, you might want to let them know we're going to be coming into Latin America. It's a new webinar series called Collaborations Across Latin America. It's starting July 12th. There will be 5 webinars hosted by the Rda US, and it's designed to introduce and encourage those in Latin America to engage in the Rda community and to participate in addressing our specific research data topics. So the first webinar will be an introduction to Rda. Then we'll be going into topic-related webinars, the importance of sharing open research, open repositories, fair principles, and ethics. So please watch for more upcoming communications from us on that. And then I want to announce that the next plenary 20, will be in 2023. Rda will celebrate its 10-year anniversary since its launch, and we're going back to where it all started in Gothenburg, Sweden, March 21 through the 23rd. The event will be co-hosted by Chalmers University and University of Gothenburg. And of course, there'll be lots more news coming there. Thanks for sticking around and listening to all of us. And there's many exciting events coming up. We hope you can join us in the future. And that's it for today. Thank you very much for attending. And thank you again to the presenters.